Chris, welcome to What Got You There. How you doing today?
Sean, great to be here.
Yeah, it's
How
good to
are
see
you?
you. Like I was saying, I love the way you think about and craft your life. Some of the people I think about throughout history, the great poet and playwright von Goethe, and then his good friend Alexander von Humboldt, and the way you think about the science, the arts, philosophy, and how you intertwine that with your craft, I'm really appreciative of. And so I always want to deconstruct how people go about their life and how they think about the world. And one of the things I love starting with is around mindset. And I know you learned a great mindset from Glen Air CEO Peter Kaufman, and then you twisted it. So I would love for you to dive into the Piper mindset.
Hyper mindset. That's a good place to start. Plus, you mentioned two of my favorites, Goethe and Humboldt. Um, yeah, I think, Humboldt, by the way, when you really study his life, I think he's the perfect person, both who learned from upstream heroes and mentors like Goethe, and then how many people he affected downstream, Darwin. And like the only books that Darwin brought on the Beagle were Humboldt's
Yeah.
books. So when you read Darwin's journals, he was trying to write for the approbation of great people, great heroes of his.
Mm.
So it's a wonderful connection. It's one of my favorite biographies I've ever read, by Virginia Woolf, I believe. And yeah, so Peter Kaufman, incredible friend, mentor, someone I've learned a great deal from. He's been a frequent speaker in the class that I steward at Columbia. But what I've learned from Peter is he seeing the world, seeing how the world works, seeing how um, these different areas, like physics, biology, human history, all connect. And one of his principles was this, he looked at evolution and kind of looked at compound interest. And he had a great saying about, which I kind of simplified into persistent incremental progress, eternally repeated, which is really at the heart of what this, magic of compound interest, which we work with in the investing world, but also it's the underlying principle with which all evolution is taking place, and so it's a saying, Piper mindset is kind of how I see how businesses evolve, how they get better, how individuals evolve, get better. Um, there's no special sauce oftentimes when you really look at greatness. It's just, that dogged pursuit, and that's what's the beauty of things that are kind of growing and getting better.
Hmm. That's interesting. You've got a great line. You say, I find it invaluable to see things from the standpoint of their origin stories. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about yours. What would the early days look like where we could have gotten a glimpse into who Chris could have become?
That's a great question. I always say that there's two ways to kind of evolve a craft. Um, you can learn from a great mentor. I think that's actually the best way to do it
Anyway.
if someone's willing to be a mentor to
Mm.
you. The other way is to choose heroes and to have uh, kind of a collection of great heroes and to take bits and pieces from those heroes to craft who you want to become. And that's what I did in those early days. I had the opportunity to sit, in an investment analyst role at an early age, right out of my undergrad. And I didn't it didn't afford me a great mentor, but it gave me a great seat to sit, learn, read, um, develop a temperament for the kind of investor I wanted to become, the kind of person I wanted to become, by kind of looking at these different mentors and taking bits and pieces from that. So that was like my origin story was just reading a lot, understanding um, what it took to be um, to have some sense of a learning curve, a cumulative compounding learning curve that
Mm.
could lend itself to doing, something worthwhile. And the craft I've chosen is the investing craft. But I really at those early days, I really wanted to understand. I wanted to be multidisciplinary. I looked at Charlie Munger, and I said, "Wow, there's someone who's not just a great investor, but he's a great thinker. He's a philosopher. He's able to kind of reason through the world in a really thoughtful way and attract the respect of other business leaders like Warren Buffett or just physicists and biologists, and he could entertain a conversation. And Peter Kaufman, not many people have the respect of Charlie Munger the way Peter had for about 30 years. And Peter, I learned later in life was that also that kind of thinker that I really wanted to try to become, to be well-rounded, to be interested and interesting. So those are things that I was doing in those early years, and it lended itself to being able to kind of go down a path and say, all right, I'm ready. I'm ready to, launch my own investment firm and have a strategy I thought that really demonstrated the essence of who I was as an investor.
Was that thoughtfulness and the approach to how you wanted to think about the world and how you wanted to be able to connect with people, was that obvious prior to undergrad? Like, were there anything in your early days, teen years, where that would have come through?
No, I had like a kind of meandering journey in those early years where it took me a little bit to get going.
Mm,
I was really into sports. I really respected what my father was doing as an he was an accountant on Cape Cod, working in a small office. But what I loved what he did is he really cared about his clients.
mm,
He really served his clients well, and I saw that they respected him. I said, I kind of like that. I want to be in a position to serve others. And so I was like, oh, Dad, I'm going to be an accountant. He's like, no, you're not. He's like, I really don't like I don't like accounting, but I like, he was like, I like working with my clients. So that was
yeah.
kind of something that I learned a lot from. And so that veering off into investing. But I think it was later that I really started to understand how to learn.
Mm,
Like no one taught me how to learn. And I think there were so many years there where you're reading the book that was assigned, and you're like, you just had no scaffolding. You had no
yeah.
scaffolding to actually where the learning could actually stick to. And it was something clicked. I can't say exactly what it was, but all of a sudden I started to build a scaffolding with which the learning could actually stick. And there was memory tools, and there was all these things that were I thought were kind of quirky to myself. But now I look back and I'm like, oh, they were really important. And I try to,
Mm.
share those with others now. And but I'd say it was late start. I wish I had some of those skills and tools earlier, like podcasts like this or others where you're kind of getting those hints along the way at those early years. Because I think there was a lot of wasted great time to really take in those, that rich opportunity, whether it be sitting in a calculus class or sitting in an English lit class and just taking that incredible wisdom in. Where for me at those in those early years, it was just kind of like I'm supposed to do this, supposed to do that. So, but then it jump started, and I really fell in love with learning. It's
Mm.
one of my passions.
Chris, say you were restarting that process, you were building the scaffolding, rewinding to when you're 23, 24, and redoing it today. What does that look like?
Yeah. So the most important thing, and I probably, you know, Peter Kaufman helped refine this, was this part of the scaffolding was having a place where the categories of knowledge would be able to live. And when I think about a thread that begins kind of with physics, so if you think of like the origin story of physics is 13.7 billion years old, and you kind of take that thread through time and you're like, okay, you had chemistry emerge at a certain point. Now you get 3.7 billion years of that timeline, and you have biology kind of emerges. Then you have human history, writing, mathematics, all these human endeavors, these history. So if you think about how you learn, you're like, when I'm learning physics, I can place physics on a timeline. I can place chemistry on a timeline. And I can see it in terms of eternity throughout the thread. Human history, this is where it lives. This is how biology evolved to human history. And then all of a sudden, like things start to connect, and you have this interconnected. And so you kind of choose where you want to play at any one time. Like I'm going to play in biology, and I'm going to go down this deep rabbit hole on a particular subject of biology. And then I can step back and say, okay, where am I choosing my
Mm,
learning? So that was part of the scaffolding. And you realize that these threads are all interconnected, right? There's the timeline of the evolution of things such as technology, when we're downstream now into human history, and you're like, okay, I see where this piece of technology emerged from. I see where it might be going, right? So you have the past, you have the present, but then you have the future, and you start to be able to have some reasoning around how things might develop based on this rich history. Um, that ideally you've this is something I've shared before is you don't just want a breadth of knowledge, you want a depth of knowledge. You don't want just to know a little bit about a lot of things. I think is where people sometimes get stuck by being multidisciplinary. You need to create a habit to go deep. And the depth of the work allows you to really have a nuanced fluency with the subject. And so, I developed a habit, probably about 20 years ago where I would take 3-month increments where I would allow myself to go as deep as possible, with total immersive learning in a subject, and then step back, digest that, maybe even write it up in an essay form of some sort, move on to the next subject, 3-month increments. And that's really worked well for me.
Mm.
So depth of knowledge, breadth of knowledge, height by seeing the timeline across time and how the threads connect. Um, that's what I call a three-dimensional understanding of a learning.
Yeah, you really expanded my own thinking there with adding height into that. I hadn't conceptualized that prior to seeing some of your work before. If you're looking back over the past 20 years, you mentioned those 3-month type sprints. Has there been one that has been most fruitful? It was almost this cascading effect that led to all of these other insights.
Yeah, I think in the early years of this process, certainly a deep dive in evolution was a fun one. Kind of going to that Charles Darwin, kind of thinking in terms of the origin story of how we saw, species evolution, natural selection. So that was a fun deep dive, and kind of approaching it through real time, what it felt like to have these insights in that time frame. Um, because I think when you bring yourself back to by doing the immersive work, you get into the mindset of what it felt like to have an epiphany that no one maybe has had before, articulated before, right? And if you're studying an artist, like what did the artist feel like? The artist feel like when he or she was creating this art? Like what did it feel like to be in that time period? And so I think that immersiveness creates a texture to the learning. It's not just something from afar, it's something that you've embodied. That's why when I tend to do something on a deep dive like evolution, I'll try to touch every from all angles, like from an aspect of poetry, from an aspect of art, which sometimes is making my own art from it, right? Is creating an illustration or creating some type of work that gives it kind of makes it your own in a way.
Talk to me about
Um,
how that art's even birthed out of that. I've loved some of the pictures in some of your letters, and I love how those come to fruition. I would just love to hear about that.
yeah, I've been working with a creative artist, Camille Vicente, and her and I have been on this fun journey together where, I'll be on this path of learning, and I'm like, there's that feeling of wanting to make it your own,
Mm.
and that's where these some of the artwork comes from, or an acronym, where now this knowledge is like, no, it's part of me, it's an embodied experience. And so Camille and I have a great time where, I'll kind of give her some of these ideas that I have, and then we'll kind of have back and forth, and all of a sudden it'll be something that's um memorializes it. It really memorializes that that thing that you want to come out of the experience, and create some memory palace for it in a sense. Um, and I've been over the last 3 years experimenting with my own, uh, just playing in the art studio, just different modes of whether it be acrylics and oils and watercolors, and that sense of just the creativity aspect is a really fun part of the it's almost what you're doing is now that I see it from a brain sense, it's we learn a lot with our left brain. Our left brain is a language center, and I think as a human species we've developed a lot of left brain orientation, and the right brain is the creative. It's seeing the context of the whole, not just the parts. And art allows for this exercising of this right brain, which I think is something that has atrophied over time. So Ian McGilchrist, who's one of my favorite um, thinkers in this space, and really kind of changed my whole worldview on this subject. And I've spent a lot of time with Ian over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's just incredible to see it, through a real scientific lens. He's written, The Matter of Things, which is just this enormous um, scientific work on the subject. And yeah, so this creativity is a wonderful way to exercise this right brain, and you know, I think we all could use more of that.
Talk to me about the blending of the two. And so what I
Yeah,
mean by that is I'm thinking about one of these 3 month deep dives you're about to embark on. And there's probably a question mark, maybe even an inner tension, especially for someone earlier in their career to say, how is this going to help me in my craft of investing?
yeah,
And so I'm wondering how you think about what you're going to deep dive on next, and then around the creative tension around just exploring into the unknown, even if you're not going to see immediate benefits. I'm just wondering how you toggle through that.
yeah. And I, I do believe in practical utility to your learning. Like I really do think that, we have a responsibility to steward capital, compound capital at high rates of return over long periods of time. So we're not being paid to go down these rabbit holes of, but what we take from them are rich pattern recognition to see the world in a deeper way. And and again, I think Charlie Munger gave me a lot of permission by seeing how he did it, how he wrote it up, how his essays developed, and how he took these insights to make profound um, judgments about important decisions. And
Mhm.
so, the way the subject generally will manifest is, and I'll have a list of them, but all of a sudden one will just it'll keep kind of like poking me, like, go deeper
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
And it's just like it's a
yeah.
continued nudge. I'm like, all right, you want?
Yeah, yeah.
I know have to study, this subject in a deeper way, and so they kind of compete for attention,
Mhm.
and yeah, and that's usually how it happens in real time. And like this morning, I was sitting and we're preparing for a trip to Italy this summer. A family trip to Italy, and I always like to just okay, there's something we're going to Naples, just outside Naples, and there's something in Naples that needs attention, and um, so there's this wonderful sculpture, a veiled sculpture by Corradini, called Veiled Truth, or also it's called Modesty. And Corradini was this incredible artist that was able to take a block of marble, not just carve a beautiful, um, whether it be a human depiction, but he was able to carve this incredibly thin veils. So the idea of veiled truth is this veil over a woman's body, and so there, I'm like, oh, now I'm down this rabbit hole of Corradini and kind of preparing for this. But as I think about veiled truth and time, or truth unveiled by time, is another way that the title has been depicted through the last 1750 that the sculpture is done. I was like, oh, what a wonderful theme, because it's a theme that I've been thinking a lot about as far as the what research is it's a journey toward truth.
Mhm.
you know? And the truth is often veiled, and it's time that unveils the truth, right? So that's our job, as whether we're a research analyst, is to try to understand that underlying truth, and through time we can see where we correct or incorrect in how we were assessing it. And so there's a piece of art, but a deep philosophical connection to something that ultimately is probably the most important question, is what is truth, and how do we understand the truths of a particular subject that we're looking at.
Hmm. This makes me think about something you said a second ago around Munger. He essentially, by
Yeah,
looking at the way he thinks about the world and how he writes, it gave you permission
yeah,
to kind of live your truth a little bit more. We're talking about Goethe earlier. He says that
yeah,
great line, as soon as you trust yourself, you'll know how to live. And I'm wondering when you started to uncover deeper truths within yourself that allowed these to manifest out in how you think about investing.
Yeah, I think we all have an essence about
Mm,
us, right? And I think that life is this process of understanding what your essence is, right? And how are you not living your true self? And and so I think over time, as if you're exploratory in this, you kind of understand, you feel what your essence is, and you allow yourself to kind of align yourself with that essence. And I think the permission to do that, whether it be you're developing a craft that makes it really fills you with joy. It's you're sharing your gift with others, right? And so I think that's the permission to not just say I'm an investment banker, this is what I'm going to do because I'm going to make a living, but to pursue something that really feels like it's part of you,
yeah.
that you find real joy in it, and not this whole follow your bliss thing. I do like that expression of Joseph Campbell, but I think you can find joy in a lot of different crafts. The way that you bring that
Yeah.
part of some of your gifts to that.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. Goethe did some great stuff there, talking about his
Yeah,
own inner essence, the daimon, which you went deep on, which is always interesting. But
yeah.
this makes me think about you and your decision to launch East Coast Asset Management. I'm just wondering what you were wrestling with inside during that decision, or maybe it was a complete clear path for you. And I'm just wondering what that process was looking like.
Yeah, it was definitely an itch. It was this itch
Mm.
to have some freedom and of expression, and that freedom of expression to find that inner essence, to allow it to kind of blossom into something that could be of service to others. And I love this. There's a saying that I find useful. I kind of borrowed it from George Cantor. He said, "The essence of mathematics lies in its freedom." And I kind of tweaked it a little bit. I said, "The essence of everything that grows lies in its freedom." And I think at some point, through a process of discovery, you can that idea of freedom, the idea to have a what I think Warren Buffett has said, to paint your own canvas. So at that point of the launch of East Coast, it was the freedom and desire to start to paint my own canvas in a way that I thought, represented my sense of truth, like what I thought great investing might look like, and um, what kind of partners you wanted to do it with and for, and the kind of temperament and investing style that you could bring to that craft.
How long into your journey do you think you really knew what that temperament for you was, and you aligned that with your investment approach?
Yeah, it was definitely around like 10 years in where everything started to fall away, and you just
Mm.
realized it got simpler and simpler as far as what you knew that you wanted to focus on.
Was that a natural
And
process?
it was it was, but it never looked natural up close. Just over time, it was like, oh yeah, it kind of looked obvious back then. I mean, obvious now, but not that. I kind of looked at a lot of things. It was really interesting in those first 10 years where I would reverse engineer what were considered the best investors of all time, and that were currently investing at the time. I actually would There was a process, a very detailed process where I would kind of reverse engineer their decision making, and I would say, would I have done that? Would
Mm.
I truly have done that? Could I have done that? And there were certain things that I started realizing that the ones that made real business sense to me, I thought I could replicate. I said, I can get into the mindset of what exceptional businesses look like, what a competitive advantage is, uh, embracing secular tailwinds, not headwinds, understanding good capital allocation and good operational excellence, and then valuing the enterprise. Like that seemed like I could do that. I mean, it could be wrong from time to time, but I'm like, that made sense to me.
Mm.
Speculating, trading, um, technical investing, like any of these things, I was like, I can't do that. I have no skill there. Like
Mm.
it's magic. Like they're operating like Stan Druckenmiller, I think is a great investor, but I wouldn't have a clue to operate the way Stan does, right? So you start to realize, and that's where Warren and Charlie kind of like, I said what they were doing made a lot of sense, and they were doing it in a really admirable way, honorable way, um, which kind of gave me, back to that of wanting to do, to serve others in a thoughtful way. So yeah, it quickly kind of things fell away. I was like, this is kind of makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, I'm intrigued about some of the challenges you must have faced because even just the way you thought about that, you had to suspend the ego and not say, this is what will look better to others. Let me think about
Yeah.
what actually makes sense for me. And so I'm wondering what you wrestled with during all the years of East Coast asset management that when you look back, you go, yeah, that was pretty challenging. I obviously grew through that, but I'm just wondering what some of those struggles might have been like for you.
No, and it's continues to this day. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a real choice. I think if you are managing money for yourself and for others, that you can choose to create a large enterprise, which is going to have a lot of success, markings of success. Um, and there's some trade-offs there, right? There's going to be a lot more frictions, larger team, um, principal agent conflicts will be greater. Um, so we so over time, I also realized that I needed an internal scorecard, not just an external scorecard of success. And so the internal scorecard of success became more meaningful to me, like
Mm,
having more freedom of time, more freedom of decision making that I thought was intelligent versus what I thought would be acceptable to a group of limited partners. So all of those things were just a lot of decisions to try to create something that I thought could endure, could create a lot of joy, could um, also create something that I thought was world class.
mm,
And I think we look back on a career, and I keep bringing up Charlie and Warren, but you look at a 50-year plus career at Berkshire in decision making, and you look at a 20.5% compounding return, and there's real satisfaction in that. And so I kind of want to look back at the end of an end of a craft and have something that you're really proud of. And
mm.
and I think a lot of the decisions on architecture are important to get to the finish line there. Um, so, you know, you're a reader of Jim Carson's Finite and
Yeah.
Infinite Games. It's a real decision there to play infinite games. And and I think that's just not one decision, it's a million decisions along the way, right?
Mm. Well, we'll talk about those million decisions. You used the phrase a second ago, the pursuit of world class. I know you've written deeply about the pursuit of Arete and
Yeah.
the lens of virtue, excellence, quality, and all of that. And I'm just wondering
Yeah.
when for you, and what does that look like daily? Really a maniacal focus towards that.
Yeah, yeah. So you referenced a piece that I wrote last year called "The Joys of Unknowing," where I articulated, and this came from a beautiful piece of architecture in it's in Ephesus, Turkey, where these four Greek goddesses are sitting there. The first is knowledge, the second is wisdom, the third is enoia or intelligence, and then the fourth is arete or virtue. And this was really a continuum for me, right? Is to move from knowledge to wisdom or reason to intelligence, which is doing something simpler, um, less entropy, to arete, which was doing it with quality and with virtue. And as you kind of move along the spectrum, and arete was this place that you want to end up. And it, I've referenced Robert Pirsig's work, where he talks about quality, the metaphysics of quality, and quality being a dynamic versus a static. And so the leading edge is operating everything you do with quality and everything you do with virtue. And so that it's how you treat your counterparties. It's the investments that you want to make and associate with. It's how you journal in the morning. It's like every detail is doing it with a sense of quality, right? And that's it becomes almost the way you want to live your life in every interaction. That book made a big difference in my life when I read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and Lila. It was the first time that I saw articulated what um, what what you feel inside as what quality is.
Mm.
First, like really probably really struggled. You could tell he struggled to put those words on paper in a way that made sense. That's why he had to write Lila, because he's like, I've touched on the philosophy. I want to go deeper into the philosophy of the metaphysics of quality. And I would literally fast forward to all the parts. I'm like, okay, we're getting more of a nugget of what quality is, and then you tell a little story. But it was a really important book on the articulation of quality and virtue.
Mm. You mentioned some of the books you've read. You mentioned Warren and Charlie multiple times here. You've had some tremendous speakers in your class. I know James Corse was one of them. If you're looking back and really thinking through some of the people that you've studied and that you've met, who do you think embodies this level of quality?
First person that comes to mind and is Nick Sleep. You know,
Mm.
Nick Sleep, who ran Nomad, which was almost a mystical investment partnership out of London for many years. Incredible long-term track record, some of the best investment letter writing I've ever seen. So Nick was gracious. He doesn't do a lot of public interviews or speaking, and he's been a gracious perennial speaker in the class, and Nick articulated these concepts of quality in his letters, and he lived it
Mm.
right up to the point where he closed the fund. He wanted to close the fund in a way of quality, of right at the without any deterioration of quality in any part of what they were doing. And that was it's impressive because it's not just words, it's actions. And Nick and I have a fun conversation every year where we go a little deeper and share that story with the students, and try to give the students kind of a model for what quality looks like.
Mm.
And I think that meant a lot to Nick when he was, running the fund, and how he runs his life today. Yeah. So Nick is great. I highly recommend the letters are all public now.
Yeah.
So they're available on his foundation website. So anyone that hasn't read them, they should.
Mm.
There are wonderful investment lessons in there too. How he broke down Amazon real time by looking at the pattern recognition of Costco. And today, we're living is what are the current investment business cases that require something needs to be reimagined. Amazon was reimagined at that point through his lens, through his pattern recognition. Like, that's today. If you're looking at old patterns, old stories, you need to take those patterns and actually make them relevant for the leading edge of the train today. What does that look like? What businesses are emerging? Really, really important.
What allows you to suspend yourself to be able to think through that in that way?
Yeah, you mean the we all fall prey to old patterns.
Hmm.
Like, you get comfortable and, like,
Yeah, yeah.
this has worked for me, or um, I've been fortunate that if there's I'm a right of center thinker, meaning I do tend to see the whole. And if there is a weakness, I have to work back to then can I analytically analyze? So I tend to have an intuition, and then can I build the intuition into, can I reason through it?
Mm.
So
Okay.
so sometimes I can't. And so when I can't build an investment case or answer the question, how do I lose? Um, so working from right to left or left to right is getting that holistic view that, okay, I understand it. I can't identify blind spots that I have in my analysis. I see where things are emerging. This is what I think it'll look like 5 years from now. Tomorrow it might be different, right? Allowing the hologram to change. I
Mhm.
think that's the mindset that I try to have, is that being willing to say what information tomorrow will allow the hologram of your thinking yesterday to evolve, right? It's a dynamic process. If you're asking questions and you're open to inquiry, you're open to critical thinking, allowing that hologram to change real time is something that I found to be a great mindset um, for a world that's changing. It's a complex environment, right? There's new inputs, and the complexity is just going to emerge something very different, right?
Talk to me about the hair above the wave then.
Oh yes. By the way, my 5-year-old, he loves the hair over the wave symbol. It's become a personal symbol, as you know. So, I was on one of my random learnings. I decided to take a hieroglyph class, and I was learning
Of
teaching
course you did.
myself to read hieroglyphs because I was fascinated by these Egyptian pyramids. And I'm like, I have no idea what all these things
Yeah.
are. I'm like, I should probably take a hieroglyph class. So I did. And there was one hieroglyph symbol that stood out. And it was this hair. And it looked like he was elevated on top of this like ripple of a wave. And I'm like, I love surfing. And I was like, he kind of looks like he's surfing or foiling. I'm like, if there's one hieroglyph, that's kind of be my hieroglyph. And then so I looked it up and I realized the hieroglyph meant it was a symbol that meant the essence of life. And also it meant rebirth because the hair goddess was named Wenet. And Wenet was the goddess that gave, uh, it allowed the Nile to flood every year. So they were like, wow, thank you, Goddess Wenet. You've allowed for the flooding of the Nile, which now irrigates our crops, gives us life. So the essence of life was this hair goddess over this water symbol. And so, what I took from that is I said, wow, that kind of the way that I want to live is the willing to be able to allow things that weren't serving you to be discarded, old ideas, and be reborn to new ideas, new ways to look at things, new ways to behave, new habits, all this stuff. So the symbol is kind of this idea of the essence of life, which we talked about earlier, which is what is your essence, right? And also this idea of being reborn in a way to new thinking, new ways to create more joy, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Talk to me about what you've learned out on the water surfing.
Oh, so much. um,
So let's start there. How important is it to have some type of expression outside of your craft to open your mind up to new ways to think,
yeah,
even in your craft or about life?
yeah, it's such a good question. So first and foremost, I think we live a lot in our conscious minds. So if you actually catch yourself, you're thinking in language. You're constantly your mind's just languaging. So we're using our conscious minds like probably a little overactive, right?
Mhm.
And it's these sports potentially or meditation that allows us to remove our kind of quiet our conscious mind and allow our kind of our unconscious perhaps or just to have an expression. And so I think flow state activities is a great way to kind of quiet the conscious mind, particularly in that flow state. You're not thinking, you're just doing it. It's a full presence, right? And I love that, and surfing is one of those, it's one of those rituals and crafts that I absolutely love because it puts me in that flow state. It whether you're kind of just getting up on that wave and whether it's 3 seconds or 15 seconds, whatever it might be, you're in the state of full presence with that activity. And I think, meditation's another way to go there. I took up foil surfing a number of years ago. Um, this summer for me, it's been tennis. Just kind of going out, whether it's for 30 minutes or 60 minutes, and that moving meditation is just full flow state, presence activity, quieting the conscious mind, also getting another stacked benefit of fitness and cardio workout and all these things that just kind of fuel into to your other activities in a positive way.
Mm. Do you see that recent Federer documentary? It just came out last week, I think.
Oh, I was I'd say tonight is going to be the night to watch it. My friends who are huge tennis players are big Roger fan. So I'm like, I've been waiting to get the onslaught from them of how great it is. But I'm a huge Roger fan. He's great.
Yeah, I'm a huge Roger fan, and he does. You were talking before about investors, where you were like, I couldn't do that. That's magical. How he's able to travel on the road with his entire family and go from being center court at Wimbledon to then I lost at Wimbledon center court and I'm just rolling around on the floor. I don't know how he's able to transition in and out like that. He's magical to me.
Yeah, in the way he's held himself with such he's such a noble, good person.
Mm.
Just a great role model in so many ways.
Yeah, let me share this cool story. So Nike athlete, he was out at Nike's campus and they had the whole day of trying on all the new apparel and planning the new product line. He's walking out of the building. They're about 100 yards away from the building. So he's got his team at Nike who's escorting him through. And he goes, wait, wait. He just sprints back into the building and he comes back out 15, 20 seconds later. They said, what just happened? What'd you do? He goes, I forgot to thank the security guard. It wasn't like there were cameras around and it was just like, oh, wait a second, like human goodness here. And that is
Yeah,
why Roger, without a doubt, is one of my favorite athletes of all time. I found myself getting extremely emotional during the documentary because you think about the ending of an era and what this man meant, not just to sport, but to the world. So yeah, it was a fun read or a fun watch. But talk.
yeah. I just want to say those little acts of kindness. I think that's the magic of life.
Mm,
But I always try to catch myself and like, is there an opportunity to be kind here, right? To take an extra moment and have that an interaction that you may not have had and to go back and say thank you or whatever it is. So yeah, it's good.
yeah, he's a cool guy. Talk to me about how you think about, because I know you were so thoughtful with everything, about adding in some of these elements like surf, arts, studying hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about how you structure and craft your life that allows for the richness that you live.
Yeah, architecture is really important, right?
Mm,
Having a design principle ahead of time to make the time necessary where you're looking back and there's no deficits, right? And the way that I think about a balanced life is, I think of, okay, what is the time allocation that I want to do really thoughtful work um, in my, you know, craft of investing, right? So there's a category of time allocation. Here's the time that I want to spend with family, like really present time with family. And what does that look like in a day and a week? That feels really good. And young children require more of that time, right? So 5-year-old is is a rich time to have a lot of allocation there and time with your wife and all of that stuff. And friends are really important. It's my third category that I really allocate an appropriate amount of time, and that's important. The extracurricular activities, um, really important. It's the fourth area that I think a lot about, and community. How you're interacting with community, and then your spiritual practices. So those are the kind of how I allocate. And it's just I kind of look at my calendar throughout the day, and I look at opportunities to stack activities too. Like if I'm surfing with a friend, or spending um, time with family and but generally my day starts early. I'm usually up about 4:30 and I begin my day usually with a blank journal. And what I've tried to do over the years is if there are questions that I'm working through, and this is a practice I learned from Josh Waskin, to be honest, I will submit a question or a series of questions to my subconscious, and overnight I'll kind of see how those have changed or throughout that expression of time. And I just love sitting with the journal. And even not writing a journal, I actually just let symbols kind of populate the pages, the way that the information organizes. And all of a sudden I'll look at a blank piece of paper and I'm like, wow, I didn't really realize that I had connected a couple things. And so I'll have epiphany moments through that. But I love that journaling time in the morning. Um, then I usually kind of spend time with family, love those 2 hours of family time, and then make my way to the office and kind of arrange, the extracurricular activities throughout the day. And but it flows. It doesn't feel like it's overly organized or structured. It's just I know I have to check all the boxes or something's going to feel off.
Mm. Well, that's why I asked the question, because someone who I feel like also doesn't overly structure, I'm wondering how you've been able to learn so much and touch so many different things. So I think that approach is just really refreshing to hear about how you thought about that and then how you structured that. Um, but it makes me think you mentioned Wade Skin. He's got this great line. He says it's rarely a mysterious technique that gets someone to the top. It's the profound mastery of basic fundamentals. And I'm wondering if you're looking back and you go, you know what? At the heart of Chris Begg, these are the basic fundamentals that I've compounded over time. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I love that quote that Josh said. That's right. It's always the 10,000 hours, right? And and what you want to choose to be excellent at, like we can't be great at all things. So we have to choose a number of things that really give us some sense of joy, really, and have those 10,000 hours be really fun. Like
Mm,
when I think of like working out, that doesn't appeal to me, but like going hitting a tennis ball for 40 minutes and getting an incredible workout is like that's awesome, you know. And same with surfing. Like man, surfing it touches so many boxes: meditation, fitness, community, and you know, yeah, I can't imagine spending a lot of time in the gym. So I try to choose these things that really bring a lot of joy, but also, you get some ancillary benefits as well. And then spend that time, really invest in the time to, hopefully reach some mastery.
mm.
I love the expression of mastery in anything that I want to take up. I don't want to be a dilettante. I really want to apply myself to, you know, climb a learning curve and get better and better. It's really fun.
I love that phrase, the expression of mastery. If you're
Yeah.
looking at all the people you've looked at over the years, who would you say has one of the deepest levels of that expression of mastery, who really have gone the furthest? Anyone come to mind?
Oh yeah. In the field of, I guess we could choose any different art. We mentioned Roger, that would certainly be one on the tennis side. Um, I've learned a lot from Josh over the years. He's a friend. He's someone that we've approached some of these arts together, and he thinks a lot about mastery. Having reached a mastery in chess, mastery in martial arts, and now through his love of surfing and foiling, something we've done together. So it's he's a great person to learn side by side with on that. Um, I think going back into the investing world, I love seeing someone at the top of their game in when they're 93. When
Mm,
I had my 50th birthday, which was 2 years ago at Charlie Munger's house, and I looked across the table and I was like, this guy's 98 years old and he is on the top of his game, right? We were there for 4 hours and he was answering every question with wit, wisdom. I was like, that's kind of what's a model for me, right? I was like, I want to be doing that at 98. I don't want to
mm,
hit 70 and all of a
yeah,
sudden be like,
yeah.
okay, things are going to get a little worse. So you choose these these games that allow you to do them for a very long time. I think that's another design principle is, you know, I, I played tennis next to a number of folks that are in their 80s, just really enjoying the game, surfing, do that very late in life. So yeah, I think duration is something to kind of think about too.
Always remaining that perpetual student, which makes me think about now a decade plus being a teacher. And I'm thinking about what are some of the harder concepts that the people within the class have just the hardest time embodying. It's just like it just takes forever to learn that. I'm wondering if there's anything that you've analyzed that you think about.
Yeah, when I look at my goal as a teacher, and the reason that I it motivates me to do this every year, and I think this year will be my 13th year, um, is I want those students at Columbia Business School who have gone back to business school. Maybe they're 4 or 5 years out of their undergrad, had a career path, kind of retool, go back to business school. I think they're all very much in a hurry. They're at one of the best schools in the world. What I want them to take from at least the class that I steward is to see things from a longer time horizon.
Mm.
Can they look at models of success that have played an infinite game versus a finite game and have done it with virtue? And so I try not to say, you know, this is the way to do it. I just put a bunch of people up there that are just so admirable that you just say, oh, there's an example. Mitch Rails, there's an example. Howard Marks, there's an example. Seth Klarman, Todd Combs. Here, they have all did it a little differently, but there's an underlying principle to some, a group of people that played a longer game, that did it with class, I guess, like a sense of class.
What does
So
stewardship
that's,
mean to you? You keep
yeah, I mean,
mentioning it.
I guess I feel very, especially in those early years, there was this imposter syndrome when I walked in, or Bruce Greenwald asked me to do the class. I said, "Wait, this is Ben Graham's,
You're right.
original class. What do you want me to do? Teach the book? All I know is the book." It's like, no, just teach what you do. I'm like, oh, whoa. So it took me a little bit to feel, and I still feel like I'm stewarding something that's bigger than me,
Mm.
right? It's a legacy of what those principles meant: margin of safety, Mr. Market, thoughtful, intelligent investing, studying businesses, and there's so many greats. So I'm bringing those greats in. We're having
Mm.
a conversation. We're treating the classroom as a laboratory. So I very much feel like I'm stewarding something that's way bigger than me.
Mm. This makes me think about this is a line from one of your letters. And you said, the saying that education is wasted on the young rings quite true with my own experience. Too much of my early education, just like the way I approached Hills, Think and Grow Rich, was spent finding the fastest way to the finish line. While I often found answers, they lacked a true understanding of the principles, the process, and the illustrations of the practical experience that led to them. So, how do you develop a deeper sense of principles in general now?
Yeah, that's so true, by the way. Um,
You join your own right in there, huh? That is,
so funny.
you know how many of these paragraphs and lines have just deeply resonated with me.
Ooh. Yeah, it's all principles, right? And that's where I went in search of. I kind of went in search of the general principles that could inform the whole. Like, I believe that the world is very fractal, right? When you find a nugget of a principle, it could be applied across all different disciplines and realms. And I still am fascinated to kind of go in search of these principles. Um, because that's the nugget that you're going to be like, oh, I can take that. That is a general principle. And that general principle can be applied over here. Um, it's still what drives me. I love going out in search of them. And for example, there's a general principle that hit me over the head in the last year. And it was this concept of graph theory. Graph theory is something that I used to just call network science or network intelligence. And then I kind of understood it. If you go back to the origin story of network science, it begins with Leonard Euler in like 1739. And Leonard Euler was sitting down with a problem called the Seven Bridges of Königsberg. And the problem at the time was, can you walk across all the bridges without traversing the same one twice? And everyone was trying to solve the problem and saying, I don't know, I think you can. But he kind of stepped back and he said, well, he simplified the question. He said, let's develop a simpler, simplified diagram. This is a node, and this is an edge of the node. And he kind of laid this out and solved the problem, but it laid the groundwork, the foundation of what became graph theory. So I took this thinking about graph theory as a general principle, and I said, whoa, the architecture of graph theory is actually one of the most fundamental, important architectures of most of the things that have compounded and scaled over time. Think of like MasterCard and Visa as as a graph of how payments traverse the world. If you look at Google's PageRank system, it is the architecture of graph theory. Literally, it's just graph theory. Meta or Facebook in the early days was an application of a social network or a graph. So nodes and edges. In nature, humpback whales. Humpback whales are probably the only species that have a graph that traverses the entire globe by way of a pod, group of whales, communicating by song. And the song is the edge. So node, edge, they have a complete global graph that allows for this real-time exchange of information through song, and information is exchanged that way. And all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, everything that has been created, biggest value creation through time frame, have been the newer application of a graph. And that could be a graph on a graph. It's just a better graph. And so when I started seeing the world by way of graphs, I said, okay, ask the question, what are the graphs that are emerging today? The next layer of graphs will be the next $10 trillion company. The first $10 trillion company potentially will be the next application of graph architecture on the world.
Mm.
And that might be Earth-centric. Eventually, it will be, something that may emerge outside of the Earth, but it will be an application of a graph that's communicating. Information is moving. Information is a abstract way to say, could be, we're clusters of information, we're humans, right? Could be real money transferring through a node to node. Could be whales by song. I think one of the most interesting things that's happening real time is, as we develop autonomous driving, autonomous, you have potentially the creation of a new graph. Like in an instant, potentially, where you turn on 5 million nodes that can now be used and utilized in a different way than they have before. So, long answer to your question, but that's finding a general principle and then kind of creating some utility around the general principle as it applies to a domain that you're looking at.
I'm just admiring watching that real time, the what that general principle just gave birth to. For you to articulate it like that, what was that blooming process like for you to get there?
Ooh. It's actually funny because I joined a group of investors in Zermatt last September, and I was thinking about this real time, and I'm like, we were all tasked to come to this meeting. It was maybe 15 to 20 portfolio managers from around the world, and we could have a conversation for 15 minutes on a subject.
Mm.
And you could talk about an idea, you could talk about a philosophy, something that was maybe useful to you as an investor or thinker or whatever. And I'm like, I'm going to talk about graph theory. Yeah, I'm ready. And I got up and I started talking about graph theory. And I looked at some of the smartest people I know in the world, and they're just like blank stares at me. I'm like, I was like, I don't know if that went well. Not one person asked me a question about graph theory over the next couple of days. I was like, don't think I was ready to articulate it because I was even and still am. I'm just really amazed at what I'm learning through it. And I think that there are some individuals that have an intuitive intelligence around graph theory. I invited an incredible thinker from Austin named Charlie Burgoyne to join me last semester as I was working through this. And you talk to someone who also sees the importance of graphs, and Charlie's one of them. His eyes just light up, and he's like, it's like you found like a a kindred spirit. And he's like, and he's thinking about how he applies this into military intelligent applications. But you look at Netflix and their recommendation algorithms and application of graph theory. So there's different ways that this can be applied. If you look at the way that we store information today, we still store information in SQL Server database that is categorized, identified as a label, right? Well, in the future, it's going to be like our brains. Our brains are the most incredible graphs. We have neurons and synapses, right? A node and an edge. That's how information and data should be stored. It's not today. It's in SQL Server databases, and we will have a dynamic traversable graph where you'll be able to access this real time, grab this piece of data, grab this piece of data. But I think that we'll have to re-architect the entire way that information is stored. Now that's a big business. That's going to be an incredible business. Someone's working on it right now. Maybe it's Neo4j or someone in a garage is working on this, and it could be re-architected the way that we store data. So it looks more like our brains. It'll look like more like those whales and the whale songs.
Mm. So when you come across something like this, are you re-architecturing your investment process because of this, or are you putting it through the lens?
I would say what a clear understanding of the principle of graphs and help me understand what made some of the best investments we've ever made
Mm-hmm.
really special,
Mm.
right? They were benefiting from this underlying graph architecture.
Yep.
Google, Meta, Visa, MasterCard, Moody's S&P, Amazon its logistics network is a graph.
Mm.
So when you see a graph kernel and then the ability to scale it, big businesses can be created. 10 or 3 decade, 4 decade compounders are created. So it gave me the lens to now look at the universe. And as businesses that are emerging, you start to say, I see a graph here. This is a really interesting graph. Something to note, understand, think about. I even thought about like what I call the GIQ, like what's your graph intelligence quotient? You have an IQ and an EQ, like your GIQ.
Mm.
There are some people that see graphs in a way that no one else does. I think Elon is probably the best graph GIQ that I've ever seen, right? Look at Starlink. Starlink, like, does anyone realize he just created the most insane like graph that's ever been created? He's putting up 23 satellites every other day. And now you're like, oh yeah, we just turned on Zimbabwe for internet, and now he's turned on 110 countries now have access by way of a low cost satellite system. So it is remarkable that
Mm.
graph literally manifested in the last 7 years.
You mentioned Elon. If you're looking back, the entrepreneurs, the business titans that you've studied, who have you learned the most from?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Warren and Charlie would be on the high list, but someone I haven't mentioned yet, who I really admire a lot, is Mitch Rales. So Mitch Rales, the CEO, chairman of the Danaher
Mhm.
family of companies, not CEO anymore, I'm sorry, but he was a founder. Mitch has come into the classroom a couple times now. To see him operate with such excellence, and that concept of Piper, I think what makes Danaher special is that they're constantly iterating, right? Persistent, incremental progress, eternally repeated. And the Danaher business system is a business system that actually takes the Piper and actually puts it into practice at a large scale. And he's done it with, a number of the businesses that actually have emerged by way of, you know, Danaher's business system, Fortive and Colfax and Danaher is a very different business than it was 7 years ago. So I've had an opportunity to kind of not just learn by what Mitch has built, but also, from him directly with the students. And here's someone that is learning at a higher rate than he ever has been,
Mm.
and different domains. And it's so impressive. Yeah, really, really, um, really like Mitch a lot and what he stands for.
Has that been hard for you as you've evolved and your learning process has sped up so quickly over the decades that now you get to this level where it's hard to find new people and ideas to feed you? I'm just curious what that's like with such a Piper mindset now over decades.
If anything, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything.
So cool. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm like, uh, I developed a greater sense of humility, I think, as I go, through life, and it because I'm not looking for a finish line, like it's really fun. I just find so much fun in learning that there's always a rabbit hole or a thread to follow. And like me sitting I was at Starbucks this morning, of all places, having my latte and reading about, Corradini and the Veiled Truth, and just like, oh, I gotta stop now and, go bring River to camp. So yeah, no, it's never ending.
Yeah, we're going to round this out here in a minute, but I'm just so curious with River, how you're thinking about what it means to be a parent and the lessons you're trying to instill.
Yeah, it everyone does it differently, and I always like to teach by example, at least with a child. That you can, it doesn't matter what you say, but it's what you do, right?
Mhm.
And so just giving him, I think, an opportunity to kind of see what you do, what you're passionate about, and he may take from that, he may not. One of the things that we do together is will we paint. So I took up painting kind of when he was interested in kind of just crayons, and said, okay, so we built this little art studio in our backyard, and we'll go out there. We put the music on. We get a bunch of blank canvases, and I paint, and then he'll kind of see what I'm working on, and then and I'll see him kind of like grabbing the acrylics, and like last weekend we were working with spray paint,
Mhm.
and so we were like, I see
Very
him.
cool.
He created one of my favorite things he's ever done with spray paint and some acrylic paint, and I was like, and he just kind of was following my lead, right? So I think that's kind of how I like to parent, is just, be kind of a role model.
Love that. Chris, say you could do this long form conversation, sit down with anyone throughout history or still alive today. Who would you love to just ask endless questions of?
Uh, I think I'd have to go back to Humboldt.
Mm,
That might be a fun one. He was so interested in nature and science, in the arts and writing. He's kind of this character for me that I kind of see a lot of what influenced him, and he'd be fun. Yeah, that'd be fun. Andrew Carnegie is you know a, both a business leader, but also I really believe he stood for a lot of positive things in his philanthropic work. I think I've shared before that I go to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, and I'll from time to time, if I'm in that part of New York, and I just go visit Andrew Carnegie's grave, which, if anyone's out in that area, and just kind of pay respect to some of the things that he did. I mean, I'm not sure if a lot of people realize, but he donated, I think, 7,700 organs that went to churches to facilitate more music. He built 2,800 libraries, so gave away most of his wealth during his time frame. So and certainly Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich was all based on a lot of Andrew Carnegie's um, just philosophies and the way he lived his life.
Chris, we only scratched the surface here. There's so much depth to you, and I really just wanted to bring out that joy you exude, where what you do with your craft, you really have just merged that level of play, and your essence has really come out. So I just appreciate the heck of what you do and coming on and sharing some of these lessons. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Sean. This has been so much fun. Appreciate it.